Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield, thank you so much for joining us in studio.
Absolutely, good to be here.
We're speaking with you a day after you hosted a town hall with 4 other attorneys general. What are you taking away from that?
You know, it was a really important town hall where we had 4 different attorneys general from coast to coast come here to Oregon to talk about the work we've been doing over the last year. Really this work to protect and defend our democracy on things as critical as tariffs all the way to birthright citizenship. So it was fun to get together, talk about those things, and then frankly listen and hear from people about the issues that are on their minds.
In January, U.S. Border Patrol agents shot 2 people in southeast Portland. You said your office would review that shooting investigation. What can you tell us about the investigation?
Yeah, and what you want to remember is that in normal times, right, the FBI or your federal counterpart would be doing their own independent investigation, which is going on right now. However, when you have multiple shootings and there's a trust gap, is what we like to call, here in Oregon and frankly across the United States, the Oregon Department of Justice, in partnership with the District Attorney here in Multnomah County, in partnership with Portland Police Bureau, are conducting our own investigation parallel into what went on. And so that's something that's ongoing right now as we move forward. Because I think the ultimate goal of anything is to start with values. When we have trust issues, what we really want is a transparency and when appropriate, right? And that's the key word, when appropriate, accountability. And that's what's going on right now.
Are federal agencies cooperating, being helpful in that, in your investigation, or is that not necessary?
Yeah, and that's the ultimate goal, right, is you have different lanes that you're operating within and that there will be cooperation or people will be able to look at the different evidence that's going on. We're operating in a space right now where we've had conversations moving forward that we are hopeful that when we get to the conclusion of our investigation, we'll have enough evidence to be able to review and be able to come back to Oregonians and again kind of fulfill that mission of transparency is what I think Oregonians are expecting.
When you compare it to Minneapolis, there's been a direct order from the federal government to not cooperate with local agencies. The local agencies and the state agencies are asking witnesses to share information because they say they're not getting it from their federal partners. Is that same sort of thing happening here, or is there some level of cooperation?
Well, here's the thing. I'm proud to be in Oregon. I think the people that serve in the Oregon Department of Justice and serve, frankly, here in Oregon, I feel very comfortable with our relations. We do things the Oregon way. My hope is that we will not have a situation like Minnesota. And right now, I don't believe that we are going to wind up in a situation like Minnesota. Again, anything can change, but we're one step at a time, right? Go through the steps that we need to do to ensure that we have an investigation that has integrity and can provide the measure of transparency that I think we're all looking for.
We asked Multnomah County District Attorney a similar question, whether he had confidence the federal government would conduct a thorough investigation here. He seemed to believe they would. Do you have that same level of confidence?
We'll know at the end of the day. You know, it's one of those tough things. Like, you never get given a crystal ball in this world when you step into these roles. I believe that they are taking, you know, the right first steps. But again, we want to get to the end of the road before you make any final conclusions. And again, I think we're just in this unique time in America, this unique time here in Oregon, where we have trust gaps. And so we as a society have to say, how do we rebuild that? And I think part of rebuilding that transparency, that accountability, is making sure that we have parallel investigations so that we can go back to Oregonians and say, this is what we uncovered.
Another major development we're following, a massive transportation funding package is now going to voters. It will either go in May or November. There was some back and forth over whether the legislature could repeal that measure before the referendum vote. What can you tell us about that legal back and forth and perhaps what changed that now this looks like it will go to a referendum?
Yeah, and I'm not directly in conversations about what the current legislative strategy, and you know, I was there one time and I try and stay out of there now and stay in my own lane. What kind of came to fruition is the legislature's moving in a direction. I think people brought up a 1935 Attorney General opinion, which is, you know, buried deep, you know, and so people figure these things out, and then they're trying to look at the applicability of that. Currently, right now, we're not doing any specific analysis on what the legislature is doing, whether the 1935 opinion actually applies, because primarily we don't know what the legislature is going to do. There's a lot of speculation, so part of what we want to do is see what the legislature is going to do. They have their amazing lawyers, and I'm sure they will rely upon them as they're trying to make their decisions going forward, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
You're familiar with the legislature. You served in it. In 1935, they had the AG's opinion. Now, Democrats are saying that they got an opinion from their own legislative council. Without getting really off the beaten path here, did the legislative council, is that a newer role that maybe wasn't around in the 1930s, which is why the AG weighed in at that time? Or has there always been a legislative council?
That opinion was actually advice to the governor when it was initially done, so it was a little bit different. And yes, you're right. Over time, right, a lot of these legislative institutions morph and change, and frankly, a lot of our roles shift and change throughout the years. I think the interesting thing about this opinion is the opinion relied upon the Constitution at that point in time, right? And over years, you have case law that shifts, you have the Constitution that can be amended over time, and that's, you know, those are the things that any good lawyer is going to sit down and look and analyze and say, what is the right applicability? What are the right steps that we need to take? Because it doesn't matter whether you're in the legislature, it doesn't matter whether we're walking the streets here in Portland or where I live in Corvallis. You got to follow the law. You got to make sure that you're abiding by the rule of law.
President Trump and his administration have appealed the order blocking the deployment of the National Guard troops in Portland. The Ninth Circuit has set a date for that argument in June. What is your office doing to prepare for that, and what are you thinking the Ninth Circuit will rule?
Well, our posture in this whole thing has been from a values-based proposition that we live in America and that we should not be normalizing the use of the military on our streets. And we took a very aggressive stance to be in the court in less than 12 hours when that first order came down, with the idea that let's get in front of a judge before those troops ever hit the ground, right? And we respect our National Guard. These are Oregonians serving and doing a lot of really important work in this state. However, the way the president was using them was an abuse of power, and that's really what we brought. And what we wanted to do was talk about real facts in the courtroom. We're successful there. It's that same level of preparation that will go into the appellate court argument since that time, right? We've gotten some Supreme Court rulings that have been very helpful, and we believe, to moving forward in this dynamic. But the ultimate thing is, you know, the president didn't have authority under the federal statutes to be able to federalize the National Guard, and that's where this case is ultimately headed.
A major lawsuit Oregon is a part of challenges President Trump's executive authority related to tariffs. The Supreme Court heard arguments. Are you confident the court will rule in your favor here, in the state's favor?
Well, one thing I'm confident is human behavior is unpredictable in this world, right? The values that we moved behind that case is we're continuing to see prices increase across all America. When you go and talk to businesses across Oregon, you will hear them talk about how they are paying for the tariffs themselves. And because the profit margins are so slim, that means that you and I, those prices get passed down to us. In our Supreme Court argument, and we sat there. One of the most humbling things that I've ever done in any role that I've ever had was to sit in the United States Supreme Court and argue this case on behalf of, and our Oregon Department of Justice lawyers argue this case on behalf of all Oregonians, all Americans, when the president's lawyers looked those justices in the eyes and said 30 to 80% of those tariffs are paid by us. That's why that case matters. And you heard those justices really casting a lot of doubt on President Trump's arguments that any emergency, for any purpose, we can implement tariffs. And you're seeing that chaos. Even this week, it was the Greenland tariffs, right? He gets grumpy about something, and all of a sudden his go-to, reaction is let's slap tariffs on somebody using an emergency power that no other president had used, right? These are foundational democratic principles, and I think that's what started rubbing an even conservative U.S. Supreme Court I think wrong under those circumstances. So I am optimistic, and we're just kind of waiting for that opinion to hit any day now.
When that lawsuit first came out, I was a little surprised that there were state AGs filing that. There were some business interest groups that filed it. That seems to make sense. Can you explain the interest the state has and what grounds you're challenging the tariffs that make it a case you're going after?
Absolutely. So think about it. We're taxpayers, right? And our taxpayers go to our universities. Right? Our taxpayers go to a lot of state government. The state is a direct purchaser of material. So one of the things, if you read through the complaint, and this is really nerdy, right? We have the University of Oregon that was purchasing specialized equipment, right, for scientific purposes. Only place you could buy them was Switzerland. In the University of Oregon, our taxpayers paid increased tariffs because of the president's action, the University of Oregon. So that was a part of the standing. Now, a lot of different costs of goods here in the state increased. We're talking, when we looked at all of the states, we're talking billions of dollars that these states were going to pay, again, our tax dollars, because of the president's illegal actions. So that was really the basis for what was going on here. Now, let's take it even a step further. What you heard last May is that the revenue forecast in Oregon went down because it has a negative economic impact on industry, right, in our entire state. That means we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. That means less money for schools, less money for essential health care at the same time that this president is pulling back health care benefits. At the same time, he's pulling back food assistance. And we're trying to grapple with that as Oregonians to say, how does everybody make sure that we have health care for everybody? How do we make sure that everybody doesn't go hungry? So it's a really interesting position that the president has put the state in, and we felt bound to act under those circumstances.
Since you took office, your office has filed 53 cases against President Trump, where you've joined cases for a total of 53 cases. Not unique. Republican attorneys general sued the Biden administration. It's pretty common. What do you say to Oregonians who say you're too focused on fighting President Trump instead of focusing on issues in the state?
First thing I tell them is all the other things that we're doing, right? And that's what everybody should absolutely remember is we're creating pilot programs to reduce organized crime out in Washington County. We've doubled the capacity at the Oregon Department of Justice to tackle issues that are impacting working families, consumers, and seniors, right? Really being the watchdog for these folks. We filed a $900 million lawsuit just a couple weeks ago about skyrocketing insulin prices and how they're taking advantage of consumers. We're doubling down on that. We're going to continue to go. But that does not absolve us of the responsibility at the Oregon Department of Justice to fight for all Oregonians when the president is taking actions that force us to protect our essential rights. But at the same time, there's $4.6 billion that this president was trying to prevent from flowing into Oregon for education, healthcare, food assistance, victims' rights grants, all of these things that had we not filed these lawsuits, that money would not have flown into the state of Oregon. Incredibly important. And the other thing for people to remember, we're winning. If you look at the majority of those cases where we've sought immediate relief, we have been successful. And then, even in that victim's right case, oftentimes the federal government is waving the white flag and saying, you know what, we're wrong, we're going to go ahead and get that money flowing again. So I think that's really important for folks to take note.
You mentioned that calculation. Your office has calculated more than $4 billion that you've protected in these lawsuits. You mentioned a few of them. Could you detail what some of those programs are that are affected by these lawsuits?
Absolutely. And what I would tell everybody, when you sit there and say $4.6 billion, more than that, that's not a number that we just came out of the air. There's a spreadsheet with all of those things that we go through and calculate that impact, because that's important for us. I want Oregonians to know that, and how we have lawyers and staff at the Oregon Department of Justice fighting every single day on behalf of all of Oregonians. So things that really struck a chord with me this year was food assistance, right? We're one of the most wealthiest countries in the world. There is no reason anyone in Oregon should be going hungry. And we had 3 lawsuits really focused on protecting that. One of the other ones that we led on was Victims of Crime Act money, right? This is a situation where the president tried to politicize that money to try and get a political end, and ultimately ended up losing. And so this is a situation where we had to step in to make sure that that critical funding continues to go in our communities. Very early on, think about education, right? I have a 14-year-old son. It is critical that we have as much money going into the classroom, going to our school districts as possible. And you had the federal government trying to pull back all of that funding. Another really good one was the research dollars that flow into the Oregon Health Sciences University. We're talking about things all the way towards the research of cancer that they were trying to curb back. These are things that you go talk to anybody who works up on the Hill at OHSU, they're going to tell you this is critical money that needs to come in and really, in the long term, will help our health outcomes here as a country, as a state, frankly, the world. So it's exciting, the stuff we got going on in Oregon, and proud to have played a small part in a much bigger thing that's going on here in our country.
It sounds like you don't feel like this is partisan.
Absolutely not. I want people to think about the way we do this. We ask ourselves, are Oregonians being harmed by a given action that administration is taking, right? We look at that, and then we say, is the Constitution being violated, or is a law being violated? If the answer to both of those things are yes, and the state has standing, then of course we'll file a lawsuit. But you have justices, when they put the robe on, whether they're appointed by a Republican or appointed by a Democrat, that are sterilely applying the law to real facts in a courtroom, and the fact is that we're winning most of these cases. In fact, multiple cases, tariff case, we had Trump appointee judges ruling in our favor. You think about the National Guard case here in Oregon. That was a judge appointed by President Donald Trump, which is why he gets so upset, right? And he's trying to politicize the judiciary because he's not winning.
We've seen another effort from the president to withhold funding from sanctuary states and sanctuary cities. What is your plan to address that?
Very simple. The president tried to do this in his first 4 years, and we had a case filed here in Oregon, and he lost. If he chooses to go down that road again, we'll do the exact same thing, and we're going to win in court again. The thing I think that is frustrating for me is I would rather be spending our time not protecting federal tax on money that otherwise should flow into the state. I'd rather be doing other things. But we're the only agency here in the state, we're the only body of government here in the state that can actually perform this activity. And my hope is this next year is the president listened to his lawyers a little bit more, where he's sitting there saying, okay, this is high risk behavior. Let's not engage in that and force the states to respond.
Any goals for 2026 right now?
We're just going to double down on the things we've been doing. First thing is, how do we keep communities safe, right? We started our pilot program in Washington County. Incredibly excited the work that we've done with District Attorney Kevin Barton and local law enforcement out there. Hopeful to double down on that, and we're focusing on human trafficking, drug trafficking, labor trafficking, all those things. Excited to continue that. The other thing is like we talked about, we've expanded our resources in our consumer protection work, working on behalf of working families and seniors. We're going to continue to move forward. Kind of these first forays was that insulin case, and we'll continue to have more of those going on this year. And then my hope is we have a little less federal work, if I'm being honest, right? But it is an essential responsibility of the work that we're doing, and we need to monitor this next year, right? We have a very important election. Americans and Oregonians demand that we have accurate and honest elections, and we play a role in that.
I've got one last question. I'm hoping you can help me understand this. When a state sues the federal government, what's the value in other states joining on so that you see sometimes 20 or 30 states suing? What's the purpose of that?
Hey, it's a really fun question. Maybe your viewers might not find it fun. It's a little bit nerdy, but we'll find it fun. When other states right now, in the way that the current legal landscape is, if certain states don't join on, they may not get the relief of the given case. And so, for instance, if let's say it was to get funds flowing back again into the state based on an unlawful action, the states that join will get that relief. Sometimes you can get a national injunction. And there has been some recent case law from the Supreme Court procedurally that have shifted how we do relief in some of these cases. So right now what you're seeing is a lot of states wanting to join or be a part of things because they also would like the relief in their states, which puts a really interesting pressure on some of the Republican states. So you think about that Victim of Crime Act money. The other Republican states, if they don't join, there's a risk you may be hurt while the other Democratic states will continue to see that money flowing into their states. So really unique dynamics that are now going on that have evolved during the past year.
Attorney General Dan Rayfield, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Always a pleasure.